Well, relapses don't just happen. Oftentimes when guys are describing a relapse, it's kind of like they're talking about, well, I slipped on a banana peel and my legs just went out from under me. Golly gee, I don't know what happened. 1 second I was walking along and the next my legs went out. Let me say this. Relapses are usually the result of a lack of intentionality and poor advanced planning. Today, I want to give you some insights into how to better plan and be strategic in your recovery. The whole idea to be forewarned is to be forearmed. And to do that, I want to use an unlikely metaphor of platform arcade games in your planning. Welcome aboard.
Ready?
When it comes to porn, are you stuck, spinning out, or slipping backwards in your life? If so, then welcome to the Finding Traction podcast, a show dedicated to those who are looking to gain recovery momentum away from porn and toward the life and relationships they have always hoped for. Now, here's your host, Vern Tomke.
Well, let me just say, as I say each week, I do love to connect with guys, and I think now I have developed a number of different ways that I can be of help to you in your recovery. I am just finishing up the final videos of the 52-week Finding Traction course. I have a number of guys who are taking that. I do offer a monthly Finding Traction community group. We do weekly Finding Traction groups for guys that get into groups, and we walk together and strategize together and move forward in our recovery together. And also I do personal coaching, guys that want just the intensity of spending time with me one-on-one. Some guys I do weekly, other guys every 2 weeks. So if any of that interests you, or you just want to connect with me in a Zoom call, I really encourage you to reach out to me at bandofbrothers.care@gmail.com. Well, let's get back to this topic of pre-planning and intentionality. You are not a victim, and usually relapses don't just happen to you. Usually looking back, it becomes clear that with a bit of forethought and pre-planning, what happened didn't need to happen. And here's one word that I want to give you that is crucial that you take into account in your planning, and it is the word transitions. My point to you is this: temptations, struggles, and falls usually happen in the transitions in our life. So to make this point, let me go now to the great arcade or video game analogy. Have you ever played one of those platform arcade games? You know, you have your character that jumps from one platform to another. And as it goes, usually in order to jump to the next higher level, let's say, for example, you have a platform which is moving in the same direction or the opposite direction, you have to time your jump just right so you can land on the next higher level. And if you don't time it just right, you of course fall to the bottom where there's spikes or monsters, or you get burnt up by fire, just kind of like relapses, right? You fall all the way down and you crash and burn. So the hardest part, of course, is the jump from one level to another. It's the transitions. And it's the transitions that are the point of greatest vulnerability. I hope you're tracking with me so far. Anyone who's played video games would get that. Even games like a zombie game I'm playing right now, you have to jump from one part of the wall to another part, and if you don't make the jump, you fall to the electrified ground below you sort of idea. So let me just say this: life is full of transitions, and to jump successfully from one stage to the other, you have to both plan for these transitions and navigate each transition successfully to sustain and stay on track with your recovery. So as a point of review, I want us to focus on this one key word, transitions. Transitions are essentially when we move from one thing to another. That's pretty straightforward, right? That's what a transition is, moving from one thing to another. And I want to talk about two different types of transitions that are especially important as we seek to navigate towards a successful recovery. The first is what I'm going to call, I'm just making this up, micro transitions. And the second is called what I'm going to call macro transitions. So let's take a look at micro transitions first and how to strategically prepare for them in your recovery plan. So, what micro transitions are little transitions that happen within a short period of time, usually with not a huge amount of fanfare and a huge amount of impact. Small, micro. Say they happen over a week or a month. So for example, let's say you work, and I know everyone works different types of jobs, but let's just say you work from Monday to Friday. So at one point you move into a transition from your work week to your weekend. That's a transition. And then at the end of your weekend, you transition back to your work week. So in a lot of people's work week, they have 2 points of transition. So guess when most people struggle with porn? For example, it's Sunday night. Why is that? Because of the transition, or they don't want to face or deal with the transition of going back to work. So Sunday night for many people is a time of great vulnerability that they need to plan and prepare for. When I was working as a full-time pastor, for example, Friday afternoon was a time of special temptation and struggle for me. Why? Because my prep for the weekend was usually done, and now I was just killing time before I went home. Transitions. You know, there's other examples, maybe even smaller than that. Some guys struggle at the end of a workday when they're transitioning from work to home. Say they get home and there's no one in the house. Or maybe they even want to stop at a place they know they shouldn't stop at on the way home. Can you think of other small transitions like this? Here's another example. Many guys struggle late at night in the transition from being up to going to bed and falling asleep. We all deal with these little micro transitions, and that's usually the point when we are especially vulnerable. We need to plan for that. These micro transitions pose a risk for. You know, usually most of us, as long as we're locked in and focused on one thing, we're usually good. You know, we're in the flow and doing things. But when we're about to change and jump to a new activity or a new level, we are vulnerable. It's one of the reasons why I know a lot of guys have found it of most use, for example, them to make use of a successful plan. I had my good friend Brian this last week talking about how his weekly plan was such a crucial part of his recovery. Why? Because it's a short enough time period where we can reasonably anticipate and plan for where those transition challenges will pop up. It's another reason why sometimes having a weekly conversation with your wife, for example. We've talked on other podcasts about a Thanos, and this might be a good time to also talk and prepare for the coming week. For me, I have a lot of little transitions. Some days I'm at home working on podcasts and coaching. Other days I go and teach at a local high school. So I can think through and plan for those. If I have a whole day home, for example, I need to pre-plan for that so the day goes successfully. These are small, micro transitions. Now, Then there are macro transitions, transitions that are a lot bigger and maybe have a lot bigger impact on our lives. They pose even greater challenges as we seek to jump from one stage to the other. So, let me give you a classic example. Most guys, for example, work week to week. But then comes this thing coming up here. We're at the end of May. Guess what a lot of guys do sometime in the summer? Well, they've saved up or they banked up time for their holidays. I don't know how many weeks of holidays you get, but when you go on holidays, you transition to a completely different schedule. And that poses a risk. A lot of guys, as long as they're strapped into their work week, are fine. But now that they're on holidays, they don't know what to do with themselves. As a teacher, this was really accentuated because for an entire 2 months, I didn't have school to go to. It's not as pronounced for me now as for basically those 2 weeks of the summertime. I'm only going to have 2 extra days off because that's usually when I teach. But it's coming, and I need to think and prepare for that. Right now, I'm locked into a schedule where I work around, okay, I coach one day, I teach one day, I coach and podcast one day, and then I teach one. So that's the system that I have. All of a sudden, you pull out those 2 teaching days, and I don't know what to do with myself. I have to get my head around it. I have to plan. I have to prepare. Now, fortunately, this summer, my wife's a teacher, and so she'll be home all summer. So that actually, for my recovery, is a big help. But that's an example of a more of a macro transition. Some of our transitions are even on bigger scales than that. They pose even greater challenge. Here's the classic one that's the easiest to identify. What happens when you go from working full-time to working no time, right? You are now officially retired. Now, I know for many of you go, my goodness, I can't wait. That sounds amazing, right? Well, not so fast. I can't tell you how many guys find that going from a work life to a retired life poses huge challenges to their recovery. It's one of the reasons why I do coach a lot of retired guys. Right? So all of a sudden you've learned to do life one way. And now that you don't have that 45 hour work week in there, all of a sudden you have to relearn how to do life as it relates to your recovery. It takes planning. It takes intentionality. Of course, there's lots of other macro challenges. One of them is just life stage. You go from adolescent to young adulthood. You go from single to married. You go from married to married with young kids. You go from married with young kids to married with teenagers. You go from being a younger person, into something called middle age. You're going, okay, well, that's no big deal. Actually, it is a big deal. I heard a guy called John Tyson recently that described, middle age or your 40s as a second awkward adolescence. You go from having kids at home to being back with your wife alone, if you get that far, right? And then you go from that to maybe backing away from work. Each of those are macro transitions that pose challenges and have to be navigated. If you go back on this podcast and listen to episodes 1 and 2, the very first ones I did on this side, you will see both of those podcasts are about navigating life's stages, the unique challenges and temptations that porn present to us at different life stages. I would actually say this. I would say that we are in transitions a lot more than we realize. Recently, I read a great book. I'm actually in the middle of it right now by Bruce Feiler called Life is in the Transitions. And the byline is Mastering Change at Any Age. And he talks about life is not linear. We are always and have to learn to master change, to face the disruptions that transitions bring into our lives. He actually comes up with a list of 52 different sources of transitions, conflicts, upheavals, stressors that can take place where we transition from one thing in our lives to another, right? And he actually says most people will face probably 36 types of transitions as they grow. Now, some of those will be smaller and some of those will be bigger, but he actually says, and that doesn't sound very encouraging, I know, that most of us will experience 3 to 5 of the biggest transitions, or what he calls life quakes. You go, dude, how is this good news? Well, the bottom line is this will come. I talked to a guy recently, and the death of a parent he was close to, right? Your parents will die. Well, for him, it was a significant life quake, and he was now learning to do life, manage his emotions because of the death of a close parent, right? That would just be an example of that. We can't, the author's thesis in this book is mastering life transitions. We can't avoid transitions. It's the way we plan for them. It's the way we navigate them. If they're unplanned, that determines how successful we'll be in life and how successful we will be in recovery. We are not just helpless victims of forces beyond our control. So, this whole thing is about transitions. It's like the arcade game. We have to learn to navigate them and plan for them, whether they're micro or whether they're macro. And let me say this, one of the reasons that I think coaching is so important, I actually have started with guys, and we've really spent a lot of time on recovery coaching. And for those of you who are listening to me that have me as a one-on-one coach, you will know this. We actually moved from just recovery coaching, and some of these guys say, you know what, can I stick with you for some life coaching? Because it's in the life coaching that really helps me navigate some of these tricky transitions. Even groups are really helpful in this, because oftentimes we have groups with guys at different ages. I actually think that's a good thing, because what happens is younger guys can look at older guys and they can learn about how they are navigating transitions, and they can actually, think through how they're going to navigate the next season of their lives. Transitions, micro and macro. Life is in the transitions. So as you play and you jump from one level to another in your arcade game, I hope that you find continued success. I hope you have people around you to help you navigate this in a positive, productive way. We'll see you next time.